Good evening, everyone. We'll convene the March 16th meeting of MCE Board of Directors at 7:03 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Madam Clerk, would you please call roll?
Belvedere,
Present.
Benicia,
Present.
Concord. Did I hear present from Concord? I think so. Okay, no. Contra Costa County. Corte Madera.
Here.
Danville,
Here.
El Cerrito. Fairfax,
Here.
Fairfield.
Here.
Lafayette. Larkspur,
Here.
County of Marin,
Here.
Martinez. Mill Valley, Moraga,
Here.
City of Napa. County of Napa and all four Napa cities, including American Canyon, Calistoga, St. Helena, and town of Yountville.
Here.
Thank you. Novato. Oakley,
Here.
Pinole, here. Pittsburgh,
Here.
Pleasant Hill,
Here.
Richmond,
Here.
Ross, San Anselmo,
Here.
San Pablo, here. San Rafael, San Ramon,
Here.
Sausalito, Solano County,
Here.
Tiburon, Vallejo,
Here.
Walnut Creek. Quorum established.
Thank you. Our next agenda item is board announcement. Are there any board members with announcements this evening? Seeing none,
Oh, sorry, we have one over here in
Oh.
San Rafael.
thank you.
Yeah, just quickly, and hello, other board members and board members here. Nice to see you in person. I have just something to share from the Air District. If you didn't see it in the news, that the Bay Area Air Quality Management District yesterday adopted amendments to regulations that will phase out or that will require zero NOx hot water heaters and furnaces in residential and commercial buildings, beginning in 2024 with ultra low for some types of water heaters. And then there's some phase in targets over time. But basically a huge groundbreaking rule. It was a unanimous approval, and we had amazing testimony, and the rules are incredibly well crafted, well researched, and allow for flexibility should the market not move the direction it needs to move in terms of making installations. And this is not a mandate replacement, it's a change out. So when people are ready to change out their broken gas water heater and or furnace, they will, if it's at the right timeline, be required to replace with a clean alternative. And there is stuff on the market, but just in case things don't go as smoothly as we hope, there is the ability to have some flexibility in compliance dates. Big deal. I'm not
Thank
seeing
you.
a lot of excitement here. Come on.
Thank you, Director Rice.
We're excited over here. We're clapping.
Are there any additional board comments? All right, seeing none, I want to make sure I don't move too fast and miss anyone in San Rafael. I'm excited about us all being together in person. And I know for a lot of us, this is our first time meeting each other face to face. So hello to everyone in San Rafael and I hope to see you all soon. I'll have to make sure I'll try to rotate so I get a chance to see you all in person as well. I will, since this is a new system, we're leaving from Zoom. Please be patient with me. I just want to make sure I don't miss anyone. Thank you. Moving on to item number 3, which is public open time. This is the opportunity for members of the public to make comment on either the consent calendar or any item that's not on the agenda. Do we have any members from the public here in Concord that would like to speak? Seeing none. Do we have any public comment from San Rafael, sorry about that. San Ramon.
None in San Rafael, Chair.
All right, and are there any public comments from Zoom? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to item number 4, an update from our CEO.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm going to start off with logistics. I just wanted to point out that this is a recorded meeting. So our videographers are requesting if anyone has a computer or a phone logged into the Zoom meeting, make sure your microphone is muted. Any speakers are muted, and that way we'll make sure we don't have any interruptions. If you are planning to speak, the way to turn the microphone on is to push where there's the talking face on this device. On many of the mics, there's a little green arrow indicating where to push the button to turn on your mic. There will be a red light here and down here when your mic is on. It turns itself off after you're not speaking for a few seconds, so you may need to turn it back on if you're going to speak again. So that's a bit about logistics. But next, I just wanted to take a moment to celebrate the convening of our first in-person board meeting in 3 years. Since COVID hit in 2020, we're so excited to have you all here in person tonight and in San Rafael in person tonight. It's really exciting for all of us. And I just wanted to thank you all for your cooperation and your assistance as we work through a few of our re-entry adjustments. We hope you enjoy the light meal we're providing. I have to give a special thanks to one of our new directors, Director Williams, who suggested how helpful it would be for there to be a meal waiting for people that are traveling here. Some of you very long distances, some of you with like lots of daytime commitments. So such a great suggestion. And so everyone can give their thanks to Director Williams for the great idea. We'll be doing that every time. And next, I wanted to introduce our newest staff member. We have one new staff member since our last board meeting, and her name is Melanie Bisaker. She's joined our customer programs team as our transportation electrification manager. She will be leading our EV rebate program and our smart EV charging app program, which is called MCE Sync. She comes to us from Grid Alternatives, who some of y'all might be familiar with. She was the director of outreach and clean mobility, and she has over 20 years of industry experience. And I think she may be with us on screen. If you're there, Melanie, do you want to say hello? Or maybe she's not with us. Okay, she may not have been able to be on. But we're really happy to have her with us. Next, an exciting update. You might recall that on January 1st, we made a big change at MCE to make deep green 100% renewable energy the default service for all new accounts. And as a result, our deep green participation has gone up dramatically. And it's hard to believe it, but in only 2 months, it's increased by 55%. So we went from 13,700 deep green accounts at the end of December to 21,400 deep green accounts at the end of February. So we expect that upward trajectory to continue in the coming months. We'll keep you all posted. I'm also pleased to report that MCE customers have received $19 million in bill relief funding to eliminate electricity debt accumulated during the COVID pandemic. from between March 2020 through the end of December. And this is, we've been tracking it over time, so I just wanted to report out on the results. And this is really, hats off to our board for making great policy decisions that really helped our customers with affordability. So this 19 million includes 5 million through our MCE CARES credit program, and 14.5 million through a statewide arrearage payment program that you might have heard us talking about in the last year. That was assessed on behalf of our customers and had a really big impact for them. We also just recently published our supplier diversity report showcasing 4.16 million investment in women, minority, LGBT, and disabled veteran-owned businesses, representing an almost 400% increase in spending with diverse organizations from 2021 to 2022. And because I see Alexandra McGee over there sitting in the audience, I just want to introduce her. She is the head of our Strategic Initiatives Department. She is the crafter of our supplier diversity report and has done a fantastic job, not only documenting our success, but also hosting a Certify and Amplify event every year to get more folks enrolled in this program to help their businesses grow. So we're really excited about that. If you'd like a copy of the report, it's online. We can also send it to you if you send a request. Next, I wanted to let folks know this week MCE launched our 2023 open season procurement. We do this every year around the same time. It provides a competitive opportunity for energy suppliers to fulfill our resource requirements and to meet our ambitious renewable energy targets. Our open season solicitation will prioritize suppliers who offer community benefits as part of their submissions to maximize benefits in the local economy where the projects come from. I just got two more things. I wanted to let folks know that CalCCA, which is the statewide trade association of CCAs, will be hosting its annual conference in San Diego, May 17th through 19th. Let us know if you're interested in receiving additional information. We realize that falls on a board. Our May board meeting falls during that time period, but we anticipate a likelihood of not needing to hold that meeting. So we're going to wait and see if anything urgent comes up, but we may be able to allow folks to attend that conference in lieu of the meeting, or we could set up a remote location in San Diego for those of you that really want to go, as long as we post the address in advance. Lastly, I wanted to remind you about two requests that were sent to board members recently. First, we'd love to receive letters of support from any of you that are interested to include in this year's federal funding request for earmarks. Signed letters are due back to us by 10 a.m. tomorrow, although we will be submitting, I think, an earmark request or two after the deadline of tomorrow. I think this request went out at the beginning of the week, but if you are interested and would like to submit a letter, just let us know if you need help with that. They'll be especially helpful on our lobby trip to Washington, D.C. happening later this month. This will be attended by a few MCE policy staff along with a couple of our board members. And then the second request that is circulating is to our technical and executive committee members to respond to a survey sent via email from Darlene to help with possibly adjusting the times of those committees. We want to make sure we have input from all of our committee members, and we're looking for responses by Monday at noon. And the last thing, a couple of logistics for parking and et cetera. For folks that parked under the building here, we have a little barcode that we can provide to all of you to let you out of the garage without having to pay. Those will be brought around and put at the desk for each of you. So be sure to take those with you. I think we're going to attach them to a sticky note to make them easy to keep track of. And for those of you in San Rafael, the restrooms are out the hall to the right, and you don't have to worry about getting out of the parking lot. Yeah, and there's charging on at that parking lot, so hopefully that's helpful for some of you. And that's it for my report. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Was sent on Monday.
Was it from the board at address or from your,
Was sent to the board at.
from the board
address.
at? Okay, so
Okay, thank
yeah.
you.
Nope. To get in, you have to either type in your phone number or swipe a credit card. Sometimes it doesn't like credit cards, and you need to do a phone number. But it won't charge you until you're trying to leave. And so that barcode should get you out without having to pay.
I just wanted to follow up. I know in December, remember we had some of the skipped billing, and then in January or February, we had double billing. And I know there was a lot of back and forth, but I honestly didn't hear much from my constituency. And I was just wondering if a new bill has gone out. I haven't been tracking, and if that all got resolved, or if you've had much communication with the public on this.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing up that issue. We have not, since our last board meeting, we have not had any new instances of this coming up. So the customer calls have kind of tapered off. But we had a very, very busy couple of weeks there with a lot of customer confusion, a lot of calls. Sometimes these things happen and they're outside of our control because it's the way that PG&E handles the billing. So it may come up again in the future every once in a while, but at this time it seems to be resolved and going in the right direction. Thanks for asking.
One quick question.
Yeah.
When we met as the executive committee, you guys were just closing the RFI for new power sources. Did it work?
You have a great memory. Vicken, our COO, might like to comment on that.
Yeah, good question. So we got about half a dozen replies that internally we're looking at it. And my intent is to bring you in the near future about what it is that we're looking at collectively. Some of them have, well, there is significant increase in cost, in prices to us. From some closed loop pump gen hydro systems that are in Oregon, all the way to solar and battery and some wind facilities. But we're looking at it, but the one surprising the numbers are very high. But more to come. Thank you for the question.
Are there any additional questions from board members here in Concord? Seeing none, are there any questions from board members in San Rafael? All right, seeing none.
And I think we have a member of the public who wants to speak on item 3.
You missed her.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. My name is Rebecca Collins. I live in Fairfax, and I just wanted to share a concern that I have been kind of watching for a while. Nearly all Japanese homes have had heat pumps with natural refrigerants for a decade. Most of those are from manufacturers that have long been household names in this country as well. Along with being the least toxic, they have also fixed the size constraints issue. Many European manufacturers use natural refrigerants. Nonetheless, the EU is following through with its ban on heat pumps that do not. They are doing this in order to meet their climate commitments. Germany has created a special subsidy schedule for heat pumps and air conditionings that run on natural refrigerants. Here in California, CARB is partially regulating heat pumps to a global warming potential, or GWP, of 750. To put that into perspective, methane, known as a virulent greenhouse gas, is 87 GWP. It is very concerning to me that the heat pump industries in this country are getting a pass not only from regulators, but seem to have unquestioning and dogmatic support from environmental climate organizations as well. Unfortunately, that also means that the heat pump industry is receiving a massive windfall of billions of dollars, while other solutions continue to still be treated like the stepchildren of the climate movement. Hot water solar in most Mediterranean countries is ubiquitous and highly affordable. We need things like district geothermal projects, passive home retrofits, true zero net homes, and so many other solutions that remove electric demand from the grid that can keep our communities safe and dry during outages and extreme weather. I have started to begin to wonder whether we should start including international tours for our people here, because it's very concerning to me that we're putting all our eggs in the basket of heat pumps. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, are there any additional public comments? Or are there any, that was for item number 3. Do we have any public comments for item number 4? Seeing none, all right. Moving on to item number 5, the consent calendar. We have 3 items on the consent calendar. Would any members of the board like to remove any item from consent?
I was gonna move it. I was gonna move it.
All right, do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Motion to approve.
I'll second.
All right, so we have a, going blank. Yes, a motion by Director Nguyen and a second by, Director Perkins. Well, I was trying not to call you Matt. I was trying to call you by your last name.
Like what you like. You're fine.
All in favor?
Bye.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Roll
Madam
call.
Chair.
Yes,
I think we need to have public comment before we move on. Haven't heard, do we have that?
Yes, you called for it.
I called for it, but I can call for it again. Are there any public comments on consent calendar? Any public comment from Concord? Seeing none, are there any public comment from the San Rafael location?
There are none, Chair. I see no raised hands.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, can we please call roll?
Absolutely. Belvedere,
Yes.
Benicia,
Yes.
Concord, Contra Costa County, Corte Madera,
Yes.
Danville, El Cerrito, Fairfax,
Yes.
Fairfield,
Yes.
Lafayette, Larkspur,
Yes.
County of Marin,
Yes.
Martinez, Mill Valley, Moraga,
Aye.
Napa, City of Napa, County of Napa and all 4 Napa cities,
Yes.
Novato, Oakley,
Yes.
Pinole,
Yes.
Pittsburgh,
Yes,
Pleasant Hill,
Yes.
Richmond,
Yes.
Ross, San Anselmo,
Yes.
San Pablo,
Yes.
San Rafael, San Ramon,
Yes.
Sausalito, Solano County,
Yes.
Tiburon, Vallejo, Walnut Creek. Motion carries.
thank you. The next item is the fiscal year 2023-24 proposed budget presented by MCE's Chief Financial Officer and our Manager of Finance. This item will be presented to our executive committee on March 3rd and moved to the full board for discussion and action this evening.
And I just want to point out that we have staff from each of our department heads are on camera, ready to respond to any questions that might come up along the way. But I think we'll turn it over to Garth.
Yes, thank you, Don. So it is that time again. It is budget time. MCE's fiscal year runs from April 1 through March 31st of the following calendar year. So We're in March right now, and so it is time that we propose for the board's consideration our budgets for our operating fund, for our energy efficiency program fund, our program development fund, and the resiliency fund. The main fund where all of our customer revenues go in and where we pay all of our expenses and power contracts is the operating fund. So with approval of our budgets, that allows staff to spend funds within the limits set forth in each of these budget line items. Again, it allows us to fund oftentimes from MCE's reserves through transfers to our the program development fund and to the resiliency VPP fund. And also then with what's left over allows us to contribute to our reserves and to try to reach our reserve targets. Okay. Can we go to move it forward a couple of slides? Okay. So first, what we'd like to explain what's up here is the column on the left is the approved budget, which was approved by the board last year. The center column, the fiscal year 22-23 projected budget is actuals through November and then projections through the rest of the fiscal year to see sort of kind of where we project the budget actually to turn out for the current fiscal year. And then what we're putting up for approval today and consideration is next year's budget, which is the gray vertical column, and that projects revenues, electricity expenses, the net revenue, the net energy revenue, and then from that we pay our operating expenses and then put money into our reserves. So I think what we'd like to point out here is, and this is the reason that staff came to the board for a rate increase last year, was that in particular, if you look at that energy expense line from our projection last year, right around this time, energy expenses were fully over $70 million higher than we anticipated. So that was eating dramatically into what we expected to put into reserves. We still believe now, again, with the rate increase implemented on January 1, that we will be positive to the tune of $30 to $35 million for the current fiscal year. But we are putting forward a budget now that if projections hold out, we would expect to produce somewhere around $100 million to the net after our other operating expenses. So I'll point you to, again, in the gray column, the operating revenues. Again, now projected to be about $816 million. Most of that increase over the budget for the current year is related to that rate increase. We do expect some small, but really not that much actual energy demand from our customers. And then we have an allowance for uncollectible accounts. And I'm pleased to announce that we're reducing that projection from 3% of our revenues to 2%. And we hope and believe that in actuality, our actual uncollectibles will be under that. So with that, with the projected cost of energy of around, again, $665 million, 666, that produces net revenues before our other operating expenses of around $134 million. Next slide. So I wanted to, at this time, take a second and update the board based upon these projected net revenues, where we are projecting we're going to be on meeting our reserve targets. So the reserve policy was attached to the board packet. And the reserve policy is based on trying to reach a percentage of our expenses in each year. And so what we're trying to do is have reserves equal to 60% of our expenses. And then from a liquidity standpoint, we're trying to reach a goal of 240 days of liquidity. In other words, if we had no revenues at all, we'd be able to pay our expenses for a total of 240 days. So that is really what the rating agencies, for example, for an entity like MCE target for an entity that has sort of a strong investment grade rating, about an A as we have from S&P. So that's really what's reflected in the reserve policy. So this gets us to give you some perspective here, this gets us approximately, if our net revenues are as expected in the upcoming fiscal year, that'll get us to about 82% of our goal, and about right around the same 81 or 82% of our liquidity goal as well. Next slide. And the next one. You'll hear that a lot today. Okay, so I'm going to go through each line item here in the budget. And if you have questions, you can stop me, and then we'll move on to the next and then get through all of the individual items for which we as staff request approval from the board that we can expend those monies in each of these line items. So the first is personnel. The personnel line item is going from 16 million to just a little over 19 million. Next, could you hit the next slide? I think there's with some numbers that'll pop up. Okay, thank you. So this is about a 15.5% increase from the previous fiscal year. And I wanted to break down what is driving that increase. So that's about 10.5% of the 15.5%, or about 70% of it or so is from COLA adjustments, promotions, and merit increases with staff. The other 5%, and also it's also reflective of the fact that we now have a call center fully staffed and operating. So we're also now, through our intern program, we have 9 interns and 3 fellows and 2 temporary staff. And new FTEs, new employees represent about 5% of that 15.5% increase. So that brings our head count of new full-time employees from 89 to 96. These numbers are also net of 2.3 million in grant and reimbursements, because these programs that we operate that are funded by grants and funded by CPUC money, the employees that are working on those programs will charge their time back to those grants. And so again, this is net of 2.3 million in those reimbursements.
Garth, can I ask a quick question?
Of course.
Is this a typical, this 15.5% increase, is this a typical year-over-year increase for personnel expenses? I did hear that you say we have a new call center.
No, it's actually a little bit more, Director Beckman. And again, that is because, again, we've through a lot of it is the COLA, because that was over 6% this year alone. And then again, merit increases so we've been increasing headcount at MCE relatively regularly in the last couple of years, but so this percentage increase from 89 to 96 is kind of in line. But again, though, having that call center fully staffed out, that's also added to headcount as well.
Understood. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, next slide. Next slide. Oh, any other questions on personnel? Okay. Next slide, please. The next is our data manager. This reflects, and this happily reflects a reduction of about 11% in cost. And you can hit the next slide as well. There's, I think there's, yes, okay. Thank you. So this reflects the now having this call center in-house. That was part of our data manager. And now the call center is again part of an increase in our FTEs, but is also reducing our data manager costs. But also we switch data managers, and this under this new contract is costing less. So that's it's a savings of let's see, about a little over $600,000. Next slide. The next is technical and scheduling consultants. So these are the consultants that help us schedule in our energy to meet our demand, and other technical consultants. So these, again, they allow us to better predict and utilizing more advanced strategies to predict our daily and hourly customer load, and to respond to regulatory mandates. So, and we're proactively educating staff to bring some of these capabilities in-house, but currently now we rely pretty heavily on some outside consultants. That's an increase of about 24% in cost, from $1,028,000 to a little over 1.2 million. Next slide. And this is service fees. This is effectively in the contract with PG&E for doing our billing. It's a per customer charge. And again, it's directly related to the number of customers that we have. Next slide. So legal and policy services. This is legal counsel expenses to supporting our contracting, human resources, financial and regulatory activities, including market restructuring issues. And certain legal expenses are expected to be down slightly due to changing to more cost-effective firms, but and also Cal CCA is taking on some of the responsibilities that some of our in-house counsel and regulatory folks were handling. But even so, we do expect an increase in this cost by about 6%. Next slide. Communication services. This is the communication services for MCE. It's our print, online, social, video advertising. I don't know if you've seen, we now see MCE commercials on TV. I get a kick every time I see one of those. It's some of our targeted program marketing and ongoing engagement, maintaining the website, community outreach, and so on. This is ramping up quite a bit again with kind of as COVID is hopefully behind us. We're doing more kind of in-person engagement, showing up in activities and so on. Okay, next slide. Other professional services. This is a lot of consulting relating to our support of our CRM software, our digital, I can say that, digital analytics platform, and technology and analytics department. Again, some modest increase, and again, mostly due to inflation adjustments. And that's kind of affecting our budget kind of up and down. As we renegotiate new contracts, we're seeing kind of inflation all over. And just about everyone is paying their employees more. Everything's costing more. And so that gets reflected in our contract renegotiations.
Garth, just a question, Barbara Kohler, Fairfax. Going back to the communication services, the comparison between the projected budget for this fiscal year compared to next year is about $1 million more. And I know you said we're doing more engagement, but seems like a pretty big jump.
Yes, and I think some of what's happening there as well is that when we budgeted something and anticipated spending it and then didn't, a lot of times that gets pushed into the next fiscal year. So it's not only just an increase from 2.1 million to 2.4 million, but it's a lot of pushing what was unspent into that next year as well. So again, and what we do with this operating fund is at the end of the fiscal year, it gets zeroed out. And so any amounts not spent sort of go into MCEs, remain in the operating fund, and then we start fresh with a new budget. So there is no carryover from one year to the next. So if it's unspent, but then we say, hey, we still want to do that, whatever that activity is or whatever that program is, then it gets pushed into the next year.
Okay.
It gets put in the budget there.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Other professional services. Oh, so I think I talked about this already. So go to the next line. General administrative. This is related to all of our costs, office supplies, data, travel, dues and subscriptions, support for Cal CCA and other related expenses, and also associated with our increased regulatory and legislative activities, CRM licenses for a public affairs department, customer programs, and so on. And also, it's in this as well as some of our load forecasting software used by our power resources department. Okay, next slide. Occupancy. So there's some pretty good news here. And many thanks to Vicken and Justine for renegotiating our lease in Concord. So we expect a reduction in costs there and of about 11%. That's the one, yeah, that's the one place where, is sort of real estate, in particular, commercial real estate, where the pandemic had a pretty dramatic effect, a negative effect on costs for the owners and a benefit to us as lessors. Okay, contingency. So contingency is just that. It's an amount that we put aside in case any of these line items run over budget. That's the contingencies managed by the finance department. We've not had to use it in the last few years, but it's there in case we have some unexpected expenses related to any individual line item. And so we have 1.5 million to apply before we come back to the board for any changes. Okay, next slide. So that brings our total operating expenses to 39,687,000. Again, if you look at what our projected actuals are versus our current budget, it's significantly under that. If the past is any indication of the future, we'll probably end up, quite a bit under that projected operating budget. Next slide. Okay, we're going to quickly go through some non-operating revenues and expenses. So the first is grant income, and we're pleased to report that we anticipate a significant jump in grant income, and that's because of some significant efforts by staff and some of the members of the board to get some federal funding with some of the federal programs. These federally earmarked funds. Interest earnings increases, again, reflective of significantly higher interest rates in our investment program, and also the retention of an outside investment management company. And yeah, I think that's it on non-operating revenues, but a pretty significant increase in terms of the grant funds and interest earnings. And I think interest earnings that's projected, I think, are pretty conservative. We should do probably significantly better than that. Where we saw a very distinct decrease in interest rates recently as a result of some of the banking stressors. Okay.
Question for you.
I'm sorry.
Question for you, Scott Perkins from San Ramon.
Yes.
I'm sure we hold a number of fixed, like bonds, fixed interest securities, and how do we reflect the loss in market value of those? Because as interest rates rise, those bonds lose value.
Yeah, that's correct. We have the investment policy limits MCE to invest no longer than 5 years in maturity. Fortunately, we were primarily in money market funds as interest rates were increasing, and only really started investing out and here at MCE in terms of what we were investing in. We really only invested for the most part out 6 months to a year. That portfolio is doing, again, it's very, very short, a very, very short average life. And again, it's really been primarily invested more at the higher interest rate levels in the 4.5% to 5% range. So in fact, if on a mark-to-market basis, our portfolio is actually positive, above par, just given where interest rates have dropped recently. Our money manager currently manages 40 million of our funds. We're just about to send another 20 million to them. They manage, again, on a portfolio basis, targeting an average life of just over 2 years. And again, they're only managing an amount of money that we don't anticipate ever touching or having to touch. So they invest a little bit longer. But again, what we anticipate happening is that all of those investments will run to maturity, but they are marked to market, as you would suggest. So you will see that in your monthly reports that we send around, indicates the value of all of those individual securities and their mark to market value. Our CDs are marked at par, but the rest of those investments, the bonds that you'll see managed by our investment advisor, will be marked to market.
Thank you.
Okay, non-operating expenses. The way we budget it is that we will spend our grants, not what actually happens, but that's the way we show it for the purposes of our accounting. Money's not spent for grants. Those grants will actually be a lot of it will be realized over a number of years. But we're showing grants coming in and grants going out in non-operating expenses. And banking fees are primarily reflective of our credit line, cost of our credit line. This is some details on some of the grants. Again, this was put in your package if you want to just get a sense of where all these are coming from. And again, some of these are multi-year grants. And what we are showing, I believe, is primarily just the grants that we anticipate coming in to be spent in the next fiscal year. Okay, next slide. Change in MCE net position. So after we have the revenues that come in from all of our customers, and after we pay for all of our energy cost and for our resource adequacy cost, and then gets us to our net energy revenue, and then we pay all those operating expenses we just went through. If all of our projections come out as planned, we expect to be able to put some money away into our savings account, and that's what's known as our putting it or adding it to our net position. Our projections currently for our addition to net position is just a little under $100 million. And I would point you to the current approved budget, which had a similar projected outcome, I'm sorry. And it was just about $100 million. As we've spoken to you over the course of, particularly in the fall, about the increased costs that we are realizing, and then the rate increase that went in effect January 1, we do anticipate that actual addition to net position will be about $38 million in the current fiscal year. And that is primarily due and because of the rate increase we were able to implement on January 1, because those increased costs were eating into all of that $100 million that we expected to be able to put into our reserves. So, but we do expect and hope to be positive and positive to the tune of about $38 million. And again, next year, if projections hold out, we anticipate having or adding to our reserves of about $99 million. And with what we have currently in reserves and what we anticipate for the current fiscal year, that total is about $340 million. And then again, that's about 80% of our on the way to our goals.
Garth, when you calculated the expected cost of power, what kind of summer disaster did you factor in? We had what, 10 really hot days where we had to buy a lot of extra power on the spot market, and that ate a whole bunch of that $90 million. So what did you put into this budget in terms of a summer disaster?
It's a very good question. And we, MCE, and I think the whole entire Northern California experienced two significant heat events in the last 3 years. And so we were a little more conservative this year and did price in a heat event for the next fiscal year. Another aspect of what turned out to be higher expenses for MCE in terms of energy related to supply chain issues and delays in projects that we anticipated to come online that have been delayed, that then forced us to go into the markets and buy sort of market price energy, which was very high over the course of the year. So we have also been a little bit conservative about a couple of projects that are at very good prices about when they're going to actually come online this year. And so we've sort of delayed that in our projections. So hopefully there's a little bit of cushion in this budget to allow us to not have too many unpleasant surprises and be closer to that target number of $100 million.
When you do your projections, how much of our electrical load do we ideally have under contract at over the next year? Is it 90% under contract and you buy 10%, or what are we what's ideal?
Okay. Well, it's a very good question. We happen to have our quarterly risk oversight committee meeting today, where we go over all of that in excruciating detail. So under MCE's risk management policy, we are supposed to have pretty much 100% of our projected demand covered. Sometimes generally as we go into, and we look at that on a calendar year basis. But as we enter the year, as we're coming up to that year, we're continually procuring for that unhedged amount, if you will, and doing smaller contracts and forward contracts such that our goal is to be 100% hedged based on our projected demand throughout the year, throughout the calendar year. Right now, as we looked at it, I'm trying to recall, there were a couple of months where we weren't 100% hedged, but for the most part, we are, very close to being there already for the year. Next year, it looks very different. There's larger amounts of unhedged exposure. But again, as we go out throughout the year, we'll continually put on contracts looking out 3, 4, 5, and 6 months to fill up that gap and to be hedged as we approach. Certainly every forward month, we're 100% hedged based upon our projections. Heat events can kind of throw that, all out the window. But that is absolutely our policy and what we do as part of our risk management policy, which is a board approved policy.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a minor clarification to Director Perkins. So like Garth said, we strive to be 100% hedged, especially for summertime. But the heat events went beyond in usage by our customers. So I don't quantify that as underhedged. It's just new load that we did not see it coming like majority of the state did in meeting peaks that ISO has not seen for over a decade or two. So maybe I'm being sensitive a little bit about the terminology because our policy is to be hedged, and we are. But when we get dumped a whole bunch of a new load that we did not see it coming,
There's planning for this, and then there's budget.
reality. Yeah.
And so you've factored in some heat events that may not be fully hedged. Is that right?
That it showed itself being higher than the hedged amount.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, we are believers of the climate change. I don't know how much worse it's gonna get. It was in the news already. Argentina is cooking beyond what they have seen. I don't know, but we're doing our best in staying to the
Are
green.
we gonna be able to get more hydropower this year, you think?
Yes.
In California, Northern California, the short answer is yes, but not in the South and in the Pacific Northwest. So it depends where, like Hoover is still empty. So, which is 27 million acre feet of water.
Bonneville, places like that, not so much?
They need a lot more.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
So yeah, Director Perkins, it is so, and you're right, and Vic is right as well. So there's a distinction between what we have budgeted financially,
right?
Which is we have budgeted financially the potential for a heat event outcome, and so if we have one that isn't too severe, that's not going to affect our financial numbers as much because we've incorporated that into our planning that way. We can't really plan for a heat event from a hedging standpoint because again, you don't know when it is or when it's going to happen. So
yeah, it's time sensitive.
Right. It's hours and days that, you don't know when it's going to happen. So we can do it financially. We can put some cushion in there because those dollars are fungible. It doesn't matter when they occur throughout the year, but we can't really do it in our hedging. That makes sense.
Thank you.
Director Wilkinson.
So we obviously talked this through a lot in the executive committee, but you've obviously expanded a little bit more on how conservative this budget is. And so I guess my question is this an even more conservative approach than you have taken in previous years?
It is a little more conservative, but in previous years we weren't, quite frankly, all that conservative about. We were really trying to be sort of spot on our projections for cost and so on, and then we've been unpleasantly, I like to put it that way, unpleasantly surprised with what actually happened. So we wanted to be a little more conservative this year in our projections, and for example, putting in a heat event. And also, for example, assuming again that some of these projects are going to be delayed. And we just have heard that our wind project the Baywell wind project that we expected to be ready to go is going to have another couple of month delay. So, we have sort of budgeted for that. And that is actually, that's playing out. So,
Because, I mean, obviously you're seeing here, your budget is $160–70 million higher in terms of revenue because of the rate increase. But it sounds like on the expenses side, if things go better than expected, because you're assuming a continuation of very high energy prices, plus all of these shocks, that we could find ourselves with a much more healthy budget with a much bigger surplus than is currently expected. And so the question, and we discussed again this in the finance committee, is that if you're off by 100 million in the good direction, you would massively exceed your reserve target because the denominator would also be lower because your expenses would be lower. And so we did talk about this, but I do want to emphasize that I do think if things are turning out better than expected, that it would warrant a mid-year budget update as a minimum in September to just clarify where we are. I'm sure you'd come back if there was a need for a rate increase, but if there's a good case for a rate decrease because you are being extremely conservative, I would definitely encourage that takes place.
okay, I think that's absolutely certainly possible, and we'll commit to do that. I might suggest that it be, so you said September?
Just that 6 months from now, but it can be earlier.
Well, no, it's just, we have such, this industry is so frustrating. It's such a delay of actually seeing our actual expenses because of KISA. We see things, 70 days later, the actual final numbers on load and so on. So, by September, we'll have, by mid or the end of May, we'll have July numbers. So I would say either September or at the latest October again. So it's not going to be, we won't have 6 months of info by then is my point.
But you'll
So,
know whether there have been significant heat events by September, October for
right.
sure.
Certainly by the end of September, we would,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, thanks.
Garth, this is Kevin Harrell. I just wanted to echo Sally's comments because this is something that we've general conversations about. I don't really care when we do a mid-year correction, but I think just because of the uncertainties in the market, the uncertainties of finances, it's appropriate to do that. And I think there is endorsement by certainly the executive committee to do that. So
Yeah.
you pick the time
Yeah.
and let us know. But that's something I think we
Yeah,
should seriously
absolutely.
do.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd be happy to do that, and we will.
Last question. Why do you think the uncollectibles will go down by 10%? Why are you confident you can make that kind of projection?
Well, again, I think it was, as it was mentioned, there are a number of programs out there, federal programs that are assisting those customers that are behind. There were mandatory payment programs instituted so that if customers were behind, they were put on a 12-month payment program. We're starting to see the benefits of those. So customers are able to, do a better job of sort of keeping up. Generally speaking, we're seeing a lot more people back to work. So we feel like the 3% number was maybe a little bit conservative and did turn out to be a little conservative after some of these federal and state programs to help customers. And the way those programs work is the money comes to either, to PG&E and then to MCE for the energy portion of the bill. And then we take those arrears off the customer bill. So the customer doesn't receive the money. The utility receives the money, and then we reduce their arrearages. So I think we're feeling pretty good about those two factors as being able to reduce our uncollectible numbers from 3% to 2%. And we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah. Garth, can I ask a question? Katie Rice from the county, Marin. In terms of the total operating expenses at 5% of the net electricity revenue, how does that compare to prior years?
It is. Thanks. It is down. And it is down, even though those operating expenses are up a little bit. Again, it's as a percent of revenues. And so our revenues are up significantly as well. So operating expenses are becoming, over the last few years, a smaller and smaller portion of our total revenues and of our total expenses. Again, because these other numbers are going up so dramatically.
Hey, Garth, I have a question. This is Dave Pong from Danville. And I apologize for going back on the operating expenses, but I'm looking at the personnel line. And, first, this is an impressive budget. But more importantly, making sure that we've got the right people for the right positions supporting the success of the company. And I don't profess to understand, what's going on with employment or labor in your energy space. But how are we doing with acquiring good talent, and two, and probably more importantly, retaining quality employees so that we can continue to develop and grow the company?
Yeah, Garth, if you don't mind, I'd like to say a little bit about that.
Absolutely.
You're welcome to tag on. It's a very timely question. We actually are in the process of just wrapping up a market survey that Viken's been overseeing with our director of HR. We've looked at other CCAs, other similar entities, municipal utilities, et cetera, local government agencies, to look at where we are as far as compensation and specifically ranges for each of our classes of staff. We've also been looking at benefits that we offer, which we have always designed to be, as generous as we can, with a lot of elements. And we've also looked at what we can offer staff as far as flexibility. I think that as we're returning from the pandemic, there are a number of different strategies that agencies are using regarding either requiring staff to all come back or offering flexibility. We've learned that some of the CCAs that are requiring staff to come back are seeing more attrition. We've decided for now to keep things very flexible. We are having some in-person events, but it's not a required for many functions. Some functions there is in-person requirement. So there are a number of strategies that we have in place. We have, through this recent study, market survey, we've learned that we are a bit out of sync and need to make some adjustments to some of our ranges, and we're getting ready to do that in the next month because we don't want that to linger too long. We're also looking at titles. I was just talking to Director Skills Preston about that this afternoon and getting some guidance from her on how we can appropriately introduce new titles that we're seeing in some other similar agencies that will help us attract and retain a good staff. It's very important to us, obviously. I think we have a little bit of an extra element with MCE where we have been really the training ground for a lot of CCA staff in California. And so we're a great place to go and get some folks that have experience because we've been around for 13 years now. And there are now 23 CCAs, many of which are new and are growing quickly, hiring many people every week. And in some cases, our staff are seeking out opportunities in other CCAs. So we like to call it a growing CCA family, and we are very collaborative and help each other out. And we're attracting folks from other states and folks from the private utility sector to fill in. But I guess that's a bit of a long-winded response because it's very fresh in my mind. We are doing a lot to make sure we attract and retain good quality staff. We're always open to suggestions and ideas from the board, but we see that as very important.
I just want to make sure, I know the number is huge on increase from, budgeted, that it's still the right number, that you're not being I'm sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to get your perspective on it because I want to make sure, knowing that the personnel number increase is high, that we're not being shy about investing in our people this year, because if that's not the right number, then let's get to the right number so that you're not the boot camp for other CCAs.
Just
Okay.
being the boot camp is not all bad, because now you develop a lot of colleagues that can help you support positions that that we feel are important, and they'll know they're coming from a source of quality and integrity, and that can have a lot of value. So yeah, it hurts at the moment, but it can add value later.
That's an excellent point. And I think it also helps us grow a very strong CCA industry. Any CCA that's not doing a great job can reflect poorly on us. So I really do like that we have strong staff going to work at other organizations and build that strong reputation for the industry.
I just had a quick question. What vacancy rate is MCE running with right now? I know that our city has got a somewhat embarrassingly high vacancy rate right now, and that we have lots of money left over at the end of the year as a result. But I was wondering what you guys are doing.
You mean as far as number of positions
Personnel,
that are
yeah.
vacant? I wouldn't, less than 1%.
Dang, you're doing good.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Don, this is Kevin Haroff. Can I
Now you know where
chime in?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good. This discussion over the last few minutes was, in my mind, an advertisement for attendance at the Cal CCA meeting in San Diego. So I've been to those a couple of times. It is a great opportunity for members of this board to meet members of other boards and staff, and those of us who are committed to this overall movement to share thoughts and ideas. So I really would strongly encourage using that as an opportunity to have some of these conversations with some of our colleagues throughout the state of California.
Okay, thanks. Director Rice, I mean, you had a question. Maybe your mic wasn't on, and so they didn't hear you in Concord. Did you want to repeat your question, or?
Yeah, it was a follow-up to the question with regards to our total operating expense cost as a percentage of the revenues. And I was asking how it compared to the year before, and you said it was lower, and that's probably related a lot to the rates. And so I asked, well, what was that number last year before the rates went up? Did I ask that question the same? Does anyone care? No, I'm just curious. Yes. So I guess I was trying to get a sense if the expenses are trending pretty much as we would expect. And what I heard is this year they are lower because of the increased operating revenues, probably. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And in the last few years, they've been going down as a percentage of our revenues and of our expenses as well. So I mean, the operating aspect of the organization, again, those expenses, not the cost of energy, not the cost of resource adequacy, so on, but just operating the organization, those have been going down as a percent. But again, our expenses have been going up quicker than our operating costs. So as a percentage, is going down. Okay.
Thank you for fixing my statement.
Okay.
You got a question?
Director Gregory, yes.
Thank you. Ryan Gregory, Knapp County. Brad says hi and misses you. In terms of the reserves, a significant fund balance is going towards filling the reserve. When we hit policy level, what then? That's a big number.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I think we then can be a lot tighter with projecting our costs and what's necessary to again, once we hit that reserve target. I do have to say we had a reserve target just before I arrived here. One of the first things I did was to come back to the board and increase those reserve targets. We were on track to hit them. They were really at a level which was more coincident with just a barely sort of investment grade utility. It was certainly my goal and others at the organization to have MCE rated, have very strong ratings, credit ratings. And in part, this policy was part of that, of being able to get us an A rating from S&P and so on. So, but I do think, at least now with what we've seen, that if we hit those reserve targets, we're going to, and again, if we don't continue to grow in terms of load and the cost of energy, then I think we can probably or just have lower rates to be able to better cover our cost and not necessarily want to put $50-100 million away. So that certainly is the goal, that we get to that point and be able to sort of maintain those levels.
Yeah, and if I could add, we've talked about this a few times in the past, and really this will be a fun discussion for the board to have. Assuming we get to that point, really the two options are to look at reducing rates or increasing programs, or a little bit of both. So it'll be great to get there.
Can I ask a follow-up question? When do we have projections for when those targets will be fully met?
Yes, we have. We hope and believe that if we don't get significant shocks in terms of costs, that we should be able to hit those targets by the end of the 24-25 fiscal year. So actually somewhere in the middle of the 24-25 fiscal year. So not next year, that starts on April 1, but the next year after that. Our longer term planning shows that we should hit that reserve target a little about halfway to 3/4 of the way through the 24-25 fiscal year.
Thank you.
No one will hold you to that either.
And can I just follow up with that? Can you see any circumstance in which you would advocate for an increase in that target? Because obviously that reserve target, we've approved changes over time. Can you see any reason to come back and ask for another increase in that target?
It is, I'm not going to say no. It just depends again on how volatile these markets have been. I mean, what we were experiencing recently have just been sort of unprecedented, or at least since the energy crisis. The kind of price spikes we've seen in gas and just pure energy costs, and now we're seeing big spikes in PCC1 costs, effectively quadrupling in the last month or two. So, so again, I'm not going to say never, but I'm hoping that we wouldn't have to do that, because it's about where it should be, that target, given the nature of a CCA energy provider. It's what the rating agencies have targeted for a strong investment grade credit to have for reserves. So the other caveat I would have is that if MCE is looking at actually owning projects and doing so, and we may want to use some of our reserves to effectively put a down payment on something and not finance it 100% with debt. So, there's lots of things that could affect, those what we have in reserves and how we might pivot to do some things differently in the future.
This is Brianne Zorn with Martinez. Can I just make one quick comment? I would be remiss if I didn't make a shout out for reducing rates in case I'm not in the meeting in which we meet the target. The fact that we're, a board for a community, the word community is in everything that we do. And I think it would be amazing if we were to reach that goal and we were able to tell our customers that we were able to pass that on to them and lower the rates. That would be great. That said, Garth, can you please explain to me, I'm so sorry if you did this already, the change in net position between approved and projected. I can't quite wrap my brain around why it's greater than 50% off. Can you speak to why you think that is?
Yes, and it has everything. Again, when we do the budget, just as we are now, we make projections as to what the year is going to look like. And so we project our revenues, our energy demand, and with all of our different rate classes and categories, what that demand is going to produce from our what our rates are going to produce. And so that's our projected revenue. And then we have all our contracts and whatever amount of unhedged energy demand that we have out there, we make a projection as to what it's going to cost to do that. And then with all of those projections, and it's a very large and sophisticated model, we come up with a projection of our addition to net position for the ensuing fiscal year. And then reality happens. And so as we work through that fiscal year, we find out that, oh, there's been a huge heat event. We're not hedged for that. So our actual energy costs, particularly at the CAISO, can be many magnitudes higher than we expected. So in those heat events, we can have expenses that are $20 to $30 million more in a given month than we anticipated.
Yeah, and Garth, actually, can I jump in here just for a sec? I
Sure.
think that the main thrust of the question is the approved budget is what the board approved this time last year. The projected budget is how we're tracking right now. So we expect the results to be pretty different from what we approved last year. And I think the good point that Garth is making right now is that these heat events and high power supply prices have caused a pretty big difference between the approved budget and the projected budget.
And then just to follow on with that line of thinking, so then our proposed budget for 2023-24, we went back up to what we had approved, even though we're at 50% of that. So we might see that same trend next year as well, right? Okay, and we haven't pointed, do we have any particular thing, or it's just an amalgamation of all these different things that have caused that project? Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, until we changed the rates, it was going to be $100 million difference.
Right. The change in rates, it will produce more revenue, assuming similar demand, and then but again, that additional revenue will offset some of these additional costs that we're anticipating. So again, the only thing I can guarantee about the next year's budget is that it's not going to turn out as it is on the page. Okay, let's kind of see where we are right now. The change, so that's the change in net position. We went through, let's see, capital expenditures, interfund transfers. Yeah, so after we get through our budget and plans, the board then entertains and then approves some transfers into some of these funds, we have some capital outlay, which is for primarily for things like technology, laptops, other things. We did some improvements, or we will be doing some improvements on the building here. So on, that's capital outlay. You'll see in a minute a proposed transfer to the program development fund. And then so after all those transfers, we end up with sort of a net that that kind of sort of goes into our cash. So I want to point out that our net position number is before we make transfers. And so over time, this net position number may be different than our actual cash and investments to reflect the fact that we do spend some of that money on programs. Okay, so the first one is the program development fund budget. This used to be called the Renewable Energy, Local Renewable Energy and Program Development Fund. So we decided to make that not such a tongue twister, and now it's called the Program Development Fund, or the PDF. And this is a fund that we're based upon the board's approval for transfers, we put money in this fund, and then it's spent on programs. And it's a fund that if money isn't spent in a given fiscal year, unlike our operating fund budget, the money sits there and can be spent later. A lot of these programs sometimes take a number of years. It's for like, installing EV chargers and doing other things. And so oftentimes that process can take a couple of years. So in this particular case, also the board has approved in the past that a 0.5 cent of the 1 cent premium, deep green premium, is to be transferred. The anticipated revenue from that additional 1 cent is to be transferred into the program development fund for programs. And so that's reflected here in the budget for next year. We anticipate that a 0.5 cent of that 1 cent premium is going to produce something just under $2 million. And so we're requesting that the board, with that appropriation, continue to do that and appropriate and put in, again, that 0.5 cent, which is projected to be about $1,970,000. And with some carryovers of unspent funds, should allow the programs to spend somewhere around $5 million, again, with some of the carryover. Again, amounts not spent in this fund will carry over to future years. And again, we pointed this out in the staff report. Because of the lag in time between when money's put into this fund and the amount of time to sort of gear up with these programs, to get them implemented and installed, if it's, for example, if it's a EV charging, and so on. We have sort of limited the amount of request for more money right now. But these programs are ramping up, and we're getting this money spent a lot quicker than we have in the past. And so it's very likely that we would potentially come back to the board sometime in a few months or mid-year if we say, hey, we're really spending money. We're installing a lot of chargers. We'd like to come back to the board for example, another $1 million transfer or something to allow the people that do these programs to make more commitments to put in, EV chargers, for example, in the future. So just wanted to give you that heads up. We're not asking for that now, but very likely that we will come back mid-year for some additional funding. So that's the Program Development Fund. And so it really is just limited at this point to that 0.5 cent transfer from the deep green. Okay, next slide.
Through the chair. This is Carrie Birdseye from the city of Benicia. Can you go back to the last slide, please? Can you tell me why we're proposing to cut the low income solar programs in half?
I can speak to that, but I believe we may have Alice, our Director of Customer Programs, on the line. Alice, if you'd like to jump in on that while you're getting yourself on the screen. I know it might be a little cumbersome. I'll just mention that we have been little by little transitioning away from putting funds into solar only programs and replacing that with solar plus storage programs, mainly because of the duck curve issues we've talked about before, where there's so much solar on the grid in the middle of the day, it's causing a disconnect between load and generation. So that's the primary reason. But Alice, if you're there, do you want to add anything?
I am here. Can you hear me, Dawn?
Yes, I can hear you. Okay, great. Yes.
Dawn pretty much summarized perfectly the reason. I just will add to what she said is because of this focus on moving away from standalone solar and focusing on solar paired with storage. We also have the resiliency fund that can fund batteries paired with solar. So our focus is going away from the standalone solar program and more towards the pairing of solar with batteries, which is more beneficial for MCE and will be more beneficial for our customers as well.
May I have a follow-up? So would that fall under the local pilot programs then?
The resiliency program, does that fall under the local pilot programs? Is that the question?
Yeah. Well, okay, go ahead.
No, the there's a resiliency fund. I don't know. I think that was on the previous, or maybe it's on an upcoming slide.
It's on the very next slide.
Yeah. So we will see that. It has been funded out of previous fiscal years. So our resiliency programs are operating out of that budget that exists in the resiliency fund.
Thank you.
Right,
Through the chair. Oh, I'm sorry. J.R. Matulak from Vallejo. When you talk about for the program for adding more EV chargers, how do you make that determination of the quantities and locations of that?
Alice, if you're still on, please could you handle that question as well?
Yes. So our EV sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, great. Yes, so how we budget for our EV charging program is a couple of things. One, looking at past interest, and we have a good read. That program's been going on for 5 years now, and so we look at kind of what we have been successful with in the past and where we see opportunity. That is also a program where we currently have several grants coming in to help with the incentives that are available. And so we look at kind of what we expect to be able to do based on our program. And then in certain areas, for example, low-income multifamily properties, right now we're able to do quite a bit more than our standard rebate for those properties. And so we're able to project a slightly higher rate of adoption. We also right now have a grant from the California Energy Commission that's supporting charging in disadvantaged communities, so we can see an uptick there. So it's sort of a combination of just looking at what we have seen over the last 5 years, plus where we're able to offer additional funding that makes these projects more feasible for certain customers that otherwise would have a hard time completing projects with our standard rebate.
Follow-up question is part of that question is are you working with certain jurisdictions like planning commissions of trying to tie some of this to some of the development that some of these jurisdictions are trying to put in there?
Yes, so one example of that is the partnership that we have right now with Contra Costa Transit Agency. The grant that we are working on with them, it's a program called Charge Up Contra Costa, and it is linked into the Contra Costa Transit Agency's EV planning cycle. And so that first planning document was funded through phase 1 of the grant, and we're in phase 2 of this grant, which is the implementation phase. So that's one example of how our investments are being guided by local jurisdiction EV adoption planning efforts.
And Alice, if I might add, since all of you are local government representatives that know a lot about what's going on in your community, if you're aware of opportunities for EV deployment, please reach out to us. That's how a lot of our leads get started up. We're really trying to help fund daytime charging, in workplaces and public spaces, especially near multifamily housing. So please let us know if you're aware of opportunities that should be on our radar.
Thank you for that.
Okay, so I think any other further questions on the Program Development Fund? Again, this is a fund that money goes into that fund. It's appropriated by the board and stays in there until spent. Okay, next slide. We've had a good time this year changing the names of our funds. This was the Resiliency Fund last year, and now we really have changed the focus in the Resiliency Fund to be focused on a virtual power plant approach and technology. So now we're calling this the Resiliency VPP Fund. Here we're looking at, again, the board has approved transfers into this fund approximating something like $8 or $9 million over the years. There are some unspent funds here. We also have a federal grant money and also money from the Marin Community Foundation. So we're not requesting additional funding directly from MCE's operating fund this year. So in addition of about 1.25 million from these grants, and then some carry forward from previous years, puts us to be able to spend somewhere around 3.25 million. But this is a program that this is again very near and dear to Vicken's heart. I don't know, Vicken, if you want to mention anything about this, and also here too, if our VPP efforts end up really taking off, we again may come back to the board, for additional funding if we start really putting solar and batteries in homes. So again, this is what we're trying to do, trying to be able to better manage our load through being somewhat in control of those batteries. So again, we may, depending upon how this is spent, come back to the board sometime mid-year if we need additional funding.
Sure, Garth. So we talked a little bit about virtual power plants. We have a pilot project in the city of Richmond that fundamentally the basic difference between what we're trying to do, what have been done in VPPs, is take over like close to 100-year-old home and making it into 21st century all electric home with solar rooftop, battery, EV charging station, electric water heater, and what have you. So we got Energy Commission funding for that. Alexandra is leading that effort. Director Beckman is going to provide at the next board meeting a briefing about our ad hoc committee, how it went. So what our vision and goal is to take that experience and expertise and success story and implement it across all of our footprint. For example, we have 65,000 and some change existing solar rooftop. Most of them are in Contra Costa County. We have about 8,000 existing batteries that we are doing an outreach. Jamie's team is doing an outreach with that. So we're trying to have an umbrella approach on everything that we do with feed into this virtual power plant project. So more to come. It's really exciting, and we will report to you as it develops. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vicken. So that's it on the Resiliency VPP Fund. And next slide. And this is the Energy Efficiency Fund. So the Energy Efficiency Fund is effectively grant money. It comes from the CPUC. It's a very large program. And due to all of the good work of Alice and her team, we expect a pretty significant jump in some of these revenues and allocations. So we expect something like looks like almost $29 million for the next year's budget. And again, the way we show this is that of those amounts that are granted, that we spend that amount. Of course, there's a very detailed accounting of this with the CPUC, and they go back and true up based upon money's actual spent and so on. But and Alice, maybe if you're still available, just kind of talk about what this looks like kind of year to year going forward. But next year, it's a pretty significant jump from 20 million to almost $29 million.
Yeah, Garth, I am still here. And I guess I would just add some of what is driving that increase in our annual budget is the addition of 2 new, fairly well-funded programs, our Peak Flex Market and our Residential MAP program, which stands for Market Access Program. And these are both programs that came about in response to increasing summer energy prices, the duck curve problem that we were mentioning earlier. And they're focused on finding ways to compensate our customers for actions that they take to reduce their energy usage during those times of peak demand. These are both extremely new, innovative programs that MCE really piloted and brought forward in California. That being said, because they are new, innovative, and trying something that hasn't really been done before, there's a lot of uncertainty around the uptake in these programs. And so those are on a steep growth curve. We're doing a lot to improve the spending under those programs. Those are driving some of that massive increase in our budget.
Okay,
And
thanks. Alice.
if I could also add, because Alice is being very humble here, but I think we've had many years of success in our energy efficiency programs, and the CPUC has recognized that. And our first year of doing energy efficiency, it was far less than even $1 million. I think we started with maybe $200,000, and it felt huge at that time. But to see this amount of increase, I think reflects a lot of confidence that the CPUC has in our ability to deliver strong results.
Sorry.
I think you might be on mute.
Next slide, please. There we go. So, mercy. So that brings us to the end of the budget presentation. So again, the fiscal impacts of the budget or the proposed operating budget is a projected addition to net position of around $99 million. Those projections assume no change in our current rates and are based upon the best available information regarding market prices. So put it out for any further questions, comments? Director Haroff.
Not a question. This is Kevin Haroff in San Rafael. Thank you, Garth, for that detailed presentation, which I've had the benefit of largely hearing before. And hearing it in the context of our board executive committee. And I just wanted to, without derailing any further conversation among board members on the topics that you've been addressing, I just wanted the full board to know that when we went through the budget at the executive committee, I believe there was a unanimous consensus to approve this budget. So I think it's important for the board as a whole to know that that was the recommendation of the executive committee.
Yep. Thank you, Director Haroff. So yes, it was a unanimous recommendation for the board to approve the budget as presented.
Thank you for the presentation, Garth. And I just want to thank all the members of the board as well for the great conversation and discussion around the proposed budget.
Yeah.
Matt is walking around with brownies,
Hey,
so everyone's
wait a
laughing
minute.
over here.
A little sugar boost. It was like a little. Budget's always good.
So I just want to make sure that we check in to see if we have any public comment from members of the public here in Concord. Seeing none. Any public comment from members of the public in San Rafael?
None in San Rafael.
Thank you. And Madam Clerk, do we happen to have, I can't see if any members of the public are on Zoom, or do we have any members of the public on Zoom or dialing in?
No raised hands, Chair.
All right, bringing it back to the board. Is there any further comments or questions before we move forward with a motion?
Yeah, this is Dave Fong with Danville. My only comment is with the volatility and the dynamics of this whole space, I think having routine reports as to how we're progressing would be very helpful, especially if Garth has been overly conservative in his numbers. Because I think what's most important is if we have been conservative and there's an opportunity to invest where we need to really take it to the next level, we need to take advantage of it, especially with the volatility in space right now.
We have probably all just jinxed ourselves. But we do look forward to hearing. We do look forward to hearing from Garth on as the year goes through.
Thank you both, Garth. So we look forward to an update later on this year. Bringing it back. Oh,
Madam
sorry.
Chair, this is Kevin Haroff here in San Rafael. Absent further discussion among the board, I'm happy to make a motion to approve the budget.
I'll second.
So we have a first by Kevin Darlene, and seconded by Scott Perkins. All right, Madam Clerk, can you please call roll? Roll call. Oh, it's not working.
Are you able to hear me in San Rafael?
Yes.
Yes? Oh, wonderful. Belvedere,
Yes.
Benicia,
Yes.
Concord, Contra Costa County, Corte Madera,
Yes.
Danville, El Cerrito, Fairfax,
Yes.
Fairfield,
Yes.
Lafayette, Larkspur,
Yes.
County of Marin,
Yes.
Martinez,
Yes.
Mill Valley, Moraga,
Aye.
Napa, City of Napa, sorry. County of Napa and all 4 Napa cities,
Yes.
Novato, Oakley,
Aye.
Pinole,
Yes.
Pittsburgh,
Yes.
Pleasant Hill,
Yes.
Richmond,
Yes.
Ross, San Anselmo,
Yes.
San Pablo, yes. San Rafael, San Ramon,
Yes.
Sausalito, Solano County,
Yes.
Tiburon, Vallejo, Walnut Creek.
Yes. My microphone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Motion carries.
Thank you. The next item is item number 7, is on the proposed amendments to MCE Policy 014, investment policy, and we will be hearing again from our CFO, Garth.
Just when you thought you wouldn't have to listen to me anymore. Hopefully this will be a relatively quick item. So last fall, we brought some amendments, actually some pretty significant amendments to our investment policy. And these were reflective of our desire to bring in an outside investment advisor, and really around their recommendations on how we would expand some of these permitted, the list of permitted investments, but also include a number of additional protections and limits on those investments. So this request here is to further amend the policy. 2 of the amendments are really related to a change in state law or a change in the California Government Code. We wanted to align the policy with these 2 changes, reflective of the passage of AB 1489. One of those is, again, very, very much in the weeds. It has to do with and the primary issue of a security, the settlement date of that security being the purchase date for the purpose of determining the term of that security. And the other is to extend the due date for the quarterly treasurer's reports. And it's now, they're asking, or the change in law is it's now extended by another 15 days to a total of 45 days. We will be sending around the treasurer's reports literally something like, 5 to 10 days after the end of the quarter. So we're going to be well within that in any event, and that doesn't change the way we'll be doing it each quarter. But again, it's just to be in alignment with state law. The final requested change is related to a permitted investment. And so again, this was inadvertently omitted when we did the big review and overhaul in the fall. And this change expands the definition of asset-backed securities to include non-governmental issuers of asset-backed securities. But again, they meet the same credit criteria and also further restricts the overall percentage of the portfolio that can be invested in these assets. So again, the fiscal impacts are that we anticipate that these amendments will result in incremental interest earnings on those funds over time without incremental risk. And the recommendation is to approve these proposed amendments to MCE policy 014, investment policy.
Thank you, Garth. Are there any questions from members of the board here in Concord? Seeing none, are there any questions from members of the board in San Rafael?
Yes, Director Wilkinson.
I just have one quick one. In relation to asset-backed securities, are there any restrictions other than credit quality? I mean, are there any, you can invest in any type of asset-backed security as long as it meets the credit criteria?
That's correct. Thank you. It's my Director Cola. Okay, so the question was, is there any limitation in the types of assets that can be included? Director Wilkinson, I'm not really familiar with the definition in the code, but the primary intent here is to be able to purchase effectively portfolios and auto loan portfolios that meet the credit quality and terms. So yes, that's the intent here. The intent of our investment advisor was to always have that in there and to include it, but again, it wasn't included in the original expansion of the permitted investments. So again, I apologize. I don't know what is included in that asset definition, but we can limit it to simply asset back, auto loan securities or packages of auto loans, which I think is their intent. Again, we just put that in our restrictions to the investment advisor.
It was more out of curiosity whether we're going to be getting into mortgage-backed securities or anything like that, or whether it was specifically, I mean, auto loans is very narrow, but this is a pretty broad policy, so it doesn't seem to limit anything.
All right, and the policy already allows Ginnie Mae's and Fannie Mae's. So,
sure, but that's
right.
a little different than.
Right. So, so we can direct our investment manager to only invest in federally, like Ginnie Mae's, Fannie Mae's, and certain categories. And again, I'll have to get back to you specifically as to what is defined in that category in the code. But if you're looking for a specific prohibition, we can entertain that.
I don't want to hold things up, but if we can I'd love to see that list, and if there's any concerns, we can always bring back that second.
Okay, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Checking in on public comment. Do we happen to have any public comment from any members of the public here in Concord?
None in Concord, Chair.
All right. Any public comment from the public in San Rafael?
None in San Rafael, Chair.
And any public comment from members of the public over Zoom?
None online, Chair.
All right, bringing it back to the board to see if there's any further discussion. If not, I will before a motion.
Barbara Kohler Fairfax, I'd like to move approval.
I'll second.
Moved by Director Kohler, second by Director Perkins. Madam Clerk, please call roll.
Mike, Darlene, we can't quite hear you in San Rafael.
Can you hear me now? Thank you. Belvedere,
Yes.
Benicia,
Yes.
Concord, Contra Costa County, Corte Madera,
Yes.
Danville, El Cerrito, Fairfax,
Yes.
Fairfield,
Yes.
Lafayette, Larkspur,
Yes.
County of Marin,
Yes.
Martinez,
Yes.
No Valley, Moraga,
Aye.
Napa, Napa City, County of Napa and all 4 Napa cities,
Yes.
Novato, Oakley,
Aye.
Pinole,
Yes.
Pittsburgh,
Yes.
Pleasant Hill,
Yes.
Richmond,
Yes.
Ross, San Anselmo,
Yes.
and Hackler,
Yes.
San Rafael, San Ramon,
Yes.
Sausalito, Solano County,
Yes.
Tiburon, Vallejo,
Aye.
Walnut Creek,
Yes.
motion carries.
Thank you. Next item number 8 is deep green resource mix and new service offering. We'll receive a presentation by staff. This item was also presented to our executive committee on March 3rd and moved to the full board for discussion and action this evening. The presentation will be given by Lindsay this evening. Oh, video.
Oh, my mic is on. Okay.
Oh,
Sorry. Oh, cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, it was my mic was not working earlier. Thank you. My name is Vidhi Chavla, and today I'll be presenting on the deep green resource mix and new service offering. Next slide, please. So I'll start with quickly running through the agenda. We'll begin with talking about the history of MCE's procurement strategy. Next, we'll look into how energy and related markets have changed over time. The next topic that we'll cover is regulatory changes that are underway and how that interferes with our strategic goals. We'll follow up with a review of some of the challenges we see on the horizon related to procurement and what type of resources are going to help us meet those challenges. Then we'll talk a little bit about deep green, follow it up with a conclusion and a recommendation for next steps. Next slide, please. So I'll start with just talking a little bit about what MCE's procurement strategy has been so far. So MCE has a mature portfolio of resources that we use to serve our customers. And our strategy in building this portfolio has been focused on resources that meet our renewable and carbon-free targets at the lowest cost possible. We've also had a strong preference for local resources to create jobs in our communities, and that has really served us well so far. Even though, we've always worked to match our load with our supply, and there were questions about that earlier today, as a load serving entity that participates in the California ISO markets, there is no particular requirement for us to perfectly match our load with supply. And until recently, there weren't actually really many consequences of not being able to match load with supply. But there is an increasing need to match load with supply in recent times, and I will be talking about that throughout my presentation today. Next slide, please. So I'll start with looking at some market prices. So what I'm showing here is the market prices for the California Independent System Operator. These markets, I'm showing prices starting from 2019 that go up to, most recently, that is January of 2023. And I wanted to focus on this because I earlier talked about consequences of having unmatched load and supply. And it's important to understand that to the extent that we don't match our load with equivalent supply, the California Independent System Operator will backfill that shortfall from the market, which is why these market prices are really important for us. Of course, we bid in all of our supply into the market, but there are times when, we have shortfalls because we have variable load that changes every hour to hour, minute to minute, as well as variable supply. So then again, market prices are really important. And I think what I really want to zoom in here is the last 2 years of market prices. We've seen really high prices in the markets in 2021 and 2022, which continues into 2023. And that particular spike is a result of the recent natural gas price spikes, which is a little bit of an anomaly, but still, market prices have been on the rise in the last 2 years. And, when we see these high prices and if we have exposure in the markets, then that does raise our costs. So which is why I wanted to show this. Next slide, please. So next is price shapes. So what I'm showing here is our market price shapes for the summer of 2022. This is a typical day. And, what I really want everybody to focus their attention on is that as the sun starts to go down, prices start going up. And this is very reflective of our load. And especially, in the evening peak hours, early to late evening peak hours, if we don't have enough supply to match our load, we are exposed to those prices. So that's why these price shapes are also very important. Next slide, please. Now, changing gears a little bit, I want to talk about resource adequacy. I'm assuming everybody has heard a lot about resource adequacy recently. I wanted to show this analysis that CalCCA has put together for, the member CCAs. And what they're trying to show here is, all the supply that is available in the market and all the demand that CAISO has for 2023. And they picked particularly the 4 summer months for 2023. And I want to draw your attention to the very last line that says surplus or deficit. And what you see here is that, we have 1 month where we actually don't have enough supply. And the rest of the months, there is some surplus, but there's a very thin margin. And that is reflected in the RA prices that we've seen recently, because a lot of the load serving entities are competing for the same supply, and, developers are charging whatever they want to charge for the RA. And we've actually seen prices go up as much as 400% for these summer months. And even though, this is, really something that we haven't experienced in the past, we do predict that these tight conditions will persist at least in the next coming few years. And then after a certain point, when, we have enough resources on the system that are interconnected to the grid, hopefully the conditions will get better, but we don't anticipate that happening at least in the next few years.
And Fiddy, can I add one thing on this slide? This chart is showing the state of California. So this was an analysis done by CalCCA, as Vidi mentioned, but I just wanted to highlight, this is not just MCE numbers, but there is a statewide scarcity of RA, or resource adequacy, and that's what this analysis is demonstrating.
And I'm sorry, and where do we lump in?
So, we're continuing to find resource adequacy for our load. I want to say that at this point, we're looking okay for at least the initial summer months. But we continue to refine our portfolio. And I can't openly talk about our positions, but it's.
I can talk about our political positions just a little bit, because this is a very big issue right now in the legislature and at the CPUC. And we've actually been involved in a lot of advocacy and meetings at the CPUC about this exact issue. There's so much scarcity in the market. And at the same time, the CPUC has a penalty structure for load serving entities, including CCAs that don't comply with the RA obligations. MCE has always been able to comply with the obligations, but we've been out in the market offering very high prices for resource adequacy, and it doesn't seem to be available. And this analysis is kind of demonstrating that there really is a statewide scarcity. The CPUC has not been willing to publicly state that there's a scarcity issue. And I want to add just one other thing, because I think it will come up in a future meeting or multiple meetings this year. And that is that while we see the CPUC looking to solve this problem through new procurement mandates, the real problem is that there is a backlog of projects not getting interconnected in California. There's 212 gigawatts of power supply waiting to get interconnected. Some of these projects have been waiting over 10 years. So when we get new procurement orders from the CPUC, they may be well-intended, but they don't seem to be addressing the key issue, which is that we need to interconnect the projects that have already been contracted. And simply getting more projects under contract is going to increase costs for customers without solving the problem.
So I have a quick question. This is Dave Fong. At the legislature level, is there also a concern that with it's supply and demand, and with the scarcity, that there's no cap on pricing? In other words, it's whatever the market bears, and that puts us in a vulnerable position.
Absolutely. And we are very concerned about market power coming into play here. It particularly shows up when there's a new procurement ordered by the CPUC with a very short time frame to procure. Any seller in the market is going to try to get the highest price they can, because they know it's a requirement for all the load serving entities to buy it. So we have seen lots of instances of what looks like market power in our view. And these are, prices for these resources have gone up so dramatically, as Vidi mentioned, 400%. 4 years ago, many of these projects were already built. Some have been built for 50 years, so they're not needing extra revenue to come in. So yes, it is a big affordability issue, and the waivers, the penalties that are likely to be imposed on load serving entities that can't comply this year are going to add to the cost burden on customers.
Through the chair, with speaking of your political and legislative goals, with lobby days coming up, do you have legislators that we can help advocate with, or bills that we should be backing that we can speak to our constituents about?
Yes, thank you for asking. We plan to have a briefing at our next board meeting in April on a policy briefing where we'll be talking specifically about bills on this issue. There are, I've been pleased to see just last week the bill deadlines are right around now. So we're seeing a lot of bills landing. We're actually doing analysis on over 120 bills right now. Some of them are related to this interconnection backlog, which is great to see some attention on this issue. There's also some local press or statewide press on the interconnection issue last week. And so we're hopeful that there will be some legislation on that. There will also be some legislation around resource adequacy, and we will be looking for support from board members to reach out to legislators. If you have direct relationships with folks in the legislature, it'd be great for our legislative director to know that. We do head out to Sacramento every few weeks, and often a board member or two will come along and participate in that, which is so very valuable. So yeah, writing letters and participating in person are ways that you all can contribute. And I think there will be a lot of opportunities for that this year.
Hey, Don, can I confirm that our budget for next year includes this risk?
Yes, it does. Stephanie Chen is our legislative director. Yep.
And Director Fong, just to a little bit more information, we're bidding prices that we have never seen before in auctions to get RA specifically for August and September. That's when we have heat waves, that's when it peaks, and that's when there is no capacity. So operationally, it's terrible. Financially, it's terrible. Our cost to consumers is terrible. So the fix that Don is talking about on the interconnection, that's over 200,000 megawatts sitting in line, right? Which is like 4 times the total load of California is waiting to interconnect. It's a little absurd. So anyway, just additional information.
No, and that's helpful. And I guess from the standpoint of risk, are we anticipating a 30% risk, 50% risk, 100% risk that this is going to happen? And therefore we have to basically, it's time sensitive and we need to start looking at ways to mitigate.
We are doing all those starting from the budget that you just heard from Garth. Your questions on the expenditures, what we are risking, the heat waves that we are talking about, what Vidi is presenting, they're all converging together to address that issue itself.
Director Haroff?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. Can you hear me in Concord? All right.
Yes. Yes.
Just two things. This is a conversation also some of us have participated in, and it's not a comforting conversation to hear. So two things. One is any number of us have good relationships with members of our state legislature, and I am sure that others on this board will join me in volunteering to make whatever contacts you feel would be appropriate for us to make in that regard. And understanding that there is time sensitivity to this, but aside from the timing, there is kind of a moral issue lurking behind this that I think is appropriate for us to get a handle on. And on that point, Dawn, you used the word or the phrase market power a couple of times in your discussion a few minutes ago. I think I know what that means, but if you wouldn't mind being a little more specific.
Sure. What I mean by that is when you have a small number of sellers, knowing that they have a lot, it's kind of like in an emergency, everyone, runs to fill up their car with gas. And the gas station might decide, oh, I'm going to raise my prices. That's not legal. But it's a similar scenario, what we're seeing here. And unfortunately, there's not a market power oversight in the selling of the buying and selling of resource adequacy. There's no regulatory body who's been given the authority to oversee potential market power, exercises of market power in the resource adequacy market.
And is that a policy point that we can be helpful in advocating with our legislative representatives on behalf of MCE and fellow CCA agencies?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say that we understand that our board member time is very valuable and limited, and we want to make sure we identify which bills have the most success of making it through the next couple of weeks or months. And so we may be asking for support to weigh in on bills in the coming couple of months. I think right now it's too early because there's so many bills and we don't know which ones are going to get legs and which ones are also going to get modified. But we're watching that really closely, and we'll be asking for your support once we get to the point where we really know that where we want to focus our attention.
Thank you. You have our support.
And then Chair, one follow-up. Dawn, can you just also speak to the interconnect issue? Yes, thank you.
I'll just sort of
We're not hearing Concord.
I'm so sorry, my fault. I think there are two sides of this. One is locally, we're seeing issues where PG&E is not interconnecting new load or existing load that might be getting upgraded. So that's one issue. I mean load. In addition to that, what I was talking about before was generation. So the 212 gigawatts of power that's sitting and waiting to get interconnected, that's generation. So that's more tied to the issue that Vidi was talking about. There's another issue that I think you're referencing, Supervisor Rice, which is there are a lot of instances of PG&E not interconnecting load in a timely manner. And this is particularly concerning as we are pushing our customers to electrify and to, you know, make their buildings all electric or add EV load or add, you know, switch from gas to electric appliances or HVAC. We have examples of hospitals not getting interconnected, schools, multifamily and residential buildings, police stations, all around the state. And you all may recall getting an email from us asking if you are aware of any examples in your community. CalCCA is helping to coordinate an effort where we're taking all of the data from all the CCAs about places that aren't getting interconnected because the CPUC is not doing this. And we're going to provide a list, making sure that legislators know what kind of backlog there is on the interconnection front. We've never seen so many delays. And I think part of the issue is that PG&E is very behind in upgrading its infrastructure. And so there's a need to do a lot of upgrades just for the most basic interconnection. So that is a separate issue. And if you haven't responded yet, you're aware of any issues in your community, please let us know so we can incorporate that into the analysis.
Through the chair, it's come to my attention and with a lot of development projects, especially in our own city in Vallejo, just for PG&E equipment, we're on a delay of close to 1.5 to 2 years. And so if we have the ability to get ahead of that curve, that would behoove us. And because what we're identifying is those developers that are trying to put projects in, they're having to design their project, fully design their projects 2 years in advance to be able just to order the equipment through PG&E to even make their own schedule. So this is the type of stuff of foreplanning and pre-planning that most developers have not had to do in the past that are having to do now.
Thanks for sharing that. And I'd love to follow up with you. I think it also really ties into affordability because that just increases the price for everybody.
Are there any additional questions from members of the board, either here in Concord or in San Rafael? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, do we have any public comment from members of the public here?
Yeah, actually, I think we have even more in the presentation.
Oh, sorry. I'm
Yeah,
so
that's
sorry.
okay.
That's like maybe we can put the
Yeah.
comments in between. I don't know.
But yeah, that our Chairbot used to I keep our meetings running so fast. Sometimes we'd have to stop and catch up. So it's a good reminder.
All right. So coming back to resource adequacy again, you know, I do want to show this for how resource adequacy has changed for solar over the years. You know, I earlier showed the price graph and, you know, how prices go up and sun goes down. And that's actually reflected in the resource adequacy value that solar provides. 11 years ago when we started, you know, if you bought 100 megawatts of solar, you got 75 megawatts of resource adequacy. Today, that value has gone down to 10 megawatts. So solar just doesn't provide as much resource adequacy value than it did many years ago. And part of the issue that I showed in the previous slide is also related to this, where the effectiveness of certain resources, wind and solar, has significantly declined over the years. So we're just not seeing the RA that we used to see in the market. And some of our existing RA that used to hold more value has also diminished in value. Next slide, please. So I just want to go back to our strategic goals and how it ties to some of the regulatory changes that we're seeing. MCE will always continue to reduce the carbon intensity of the supply portfolio. We also have a goal of decreasing fossil fuel generation in our RA portfolio. Unfortunately, a lot of our RA still comes from gas-powered resources, but we're trying to change that. But I would also highlight that there are quite a few regulatory changes going on, which may require us to do hourly GHG accounting in the future. And there is one regulatory change that is definitely being implemented, which will require us to show 24-hour RA instead of the 1 RA value that we currently show on a monthly basis. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the following slides. Next slide, please. So this is kind of what I was talking about. So starting in 2025, we have a requirement to show resource adequacy in every single hour of every month. And when I say every single hour of every month, we just have 1 24-hour RA requirement for every month. So it's not that we have to show RA for every day. It's a little confusing, but right now we only show 1 RA value for the month. And in future, we'll be showing 24 RA values for every month, which will correspond to each of the hours of the day. So we basically took, an inventory of our existing resources, and we looked at our load, and we tried to come up with how our supply portfolio stacks up against the load. And this is a snapshot of what it would look like. I think the unfortunate thing to see here is the middle brown block, how big that is. So that is basically our fossil powered portfolio that we use to meet resource adequacy today. And that is where we're looking to replace it with more renewable technologies. I would just, make it very clear that our resource adequacy portfolio and our energy portfolio are separate. There's some overlap, but they're kind of separate right now. And I think, one other thing to highlight on this graph is that we do see a need again to have some resources that will help us with those late evening peak hours. And that's just another thing that we saw, in those energy market prices that we saw where we had more exposure. So those hours are still the key hours for an RA portfolio as well. Next slide, please. All right. So coming back to the energy portfolio, like I said, we do have 2 separate portfolios. There's some overlap, but this is a snapshot of our energy portfolio for 2030. And what we're looking here is, I just highlight the red line. That's our average load over 24 hours. And then the green dotted line at the top is what our portfolio would look like after all the contracts that we've executed from open season 2022. And again, to highlight where we see gaps right now is, again, those early morning hours and late evening peak hours. And we think that what would help build that portfolio to meet our load is 24/7 clean energy resources, as well as resources that can provide energy in those late evening peak hours to help us with those high market prices. Next slide, please. All right, so we talked a little bit about solar earlier. I do want to talk about, why can't we just do it with wind and solar? And I think there are many reasons, but I think it's definitely a known fact that wind and solar are often seen as the gold standard of renewable technologies because they're both renewable and carbon free. But unfortunately, we're coming to a point of saturation where it's getting difficult to cite projects within the state, sometimes even out of state. So it is becoming more and more difficult to find these projects. I think the other point that I highlighted earlier is, I showed that graph about solar as to how the RA value has diminished over time. And because of that, if we purchase solar today, we have to overbuild it by 3 to 5 times the size of a non-variable 24/7 resource in order to provide the same level of reliability, just because the RA value has diminished so much over the years. And then last but not the least, we talked about those evening peak hours when emissions and market prices are the highest. Solar is not available. Wind has limited availability in those hours, and it's variable. So we can't completely rely on either one of those. Next slide, please. So what should we do? What should be our portfolio? So this is a recommended portfolio. Obviously, as time goes, this picture might change a little, but I think what we believe today is that we will need a set of diverse technologies in our portfolio to get us to where we want to get to. We will need some 24/7 resources, that you see here. We will also need, I'm showing solar here, but we'll pair it with storage so that, we can shift the solar around when we need it. We still have wind out of state as well as in state. Out of state wind actually has a different kind of profile that could be complementary to our existing portfolio. So that's why we have it in there. And then, like I said, there are some 24/7 technologies. Geothermal is highlighted here, which will be the primary technology that can fill that bucket. And then we also have some standalone storage, which is also important because it can charge during these, hours of when we have a lot of solar energy, and can dispatch in those late evening peak hours when we have the most market price exposure. Next slide, please. So coming back to the discussion of Deep Green, we've had a lot of success with making Deep Green our default service offering. We expect that because of the uptake that we have seen, which is about 55% in the first 2 months, our estimate is that our procurement of green energy will increase by 25% in 2023. So that's a lot of more renewable energy that we'll be buying. So that's just, a fact. And then next slide, please. So what are the challenges with that comes with that, and how do we define Deep Green currently? So currently, the way Deep Green is defined, it's 100% California renewable energy, comes half from wind and half from solar. But like I showed, the recent market activity and procurement challenges, this will require MCE to make changes to our procurement strategy. And also, I would like to highlight that in August 2022, when this change was adopted, where Deep Green became our default, the board had directed the staff to bring back flexible procurement options for Deep Green if it was needed in the future. So that's why we're here. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about 24/7 resources, since I've mentioned them here and there. So, we've heard about these resources as clean, firm, reliable resources through recent procurement mandates. The procurement mandates and the analysis has shown that these resources will be needed on the grid for additional reliability. One benefit that comes with these resources is that they're around the clock and they're reliable. They are also able to provide the 24-hour resource adequacy that we need, that brown block that we need to find renewable resources for. And some of these technologies, like I mentioned, geothermal earlier, may come with small amount of GHG emissions and may be located out of state, and that's a trade-off that we're dealing with. We have actually included an option to provide firm block offers in our recent open season solicitations, and we continue to do that. And I must say that, these resources don't have to come from geothermal or landfill gas. They could come from a variety of resources put together that just have a 24/7 profile. So we give that independence to our sellers to, construct their beds in whichever way they want to, as long as we're getting that firm energy. Next slide, please. And then, there was a discussion about the generation project RFI earlier today, but also through this RFI, we at least intended to look for those 24/7 resources. We'll be looking at the offers that we've received and getting back to the board on, how to go and proceed with that. But that is another way of acquiring these 24/7 resources. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, we are planning to add 24/7 clean resources to our supply portfolio because they are essential and critical to meeting the needs of the future. We also plan to add dispatchable resources to help with resource adequacy and high market prices in those late evening peak hours. And then, to provide some cost certainty. We've seen a lot of volatility recently, and our budgets have been impacted by that. So to provide some cost certainty in the long term, we're also going to engage in more long-term power purchase agreements and also this ownership model that can provide some cost certainty. And will also help with better GHG accounting because currently a lot of our procurement is done on a short-term basis. So, it's hard to do the GHG accounting that ways or have that certainty. And then, like I said, given all the procurement challenges and the increased need that we have for procurement, we do plan to add more renewable resources that are beyond just wind and solar to our deep green service. Next slide, please. Okay, so with that, we'll request the board to direct MCE staff to explore new GHG-free service offerings for customers, given the changes that we proposed. I'd like to thank everyone and, I would like to open it up for questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that great presentation. And I'm so sorry to cut it short.
No worries.
No, I wasn't trying to. So checking in to see with our members of the board, are there any additional questions? Seeing none here in Concord. Oh, sorry. JR.
Couple of quick questions here. You had mentioned you're looking to advance more local jobs in the community. Can you kind of elaborate of the types of jobs and what you're looking for, particularly in certain communities?
Isn't working. It's in here. So I'm Lindsay Saxby, the Director of Power Resources. So we have one specialty program called our Feed-in Tariff program that is really designed to increase local development and local jobs. There are specific requirements in the contract where the developer is required to source 50% of their workforce from the local community. And pay, union wages and things of that nature. So that's kind of on the smaller scale, but on the larger scale, in terms of our large scale procurement, we're also including in our RFOs requirement that or a recommendation that folks send a community benefits proposal to us about how they're going to, put workforce development criteria, and also, potentially funds for the local community adjacent to the project or workforce development programs in MC service area as well. So there's sort of a broad range where that could take place.
Appreciate you mentioning, especially the community benefits agreements, programs like that, because that's a big part of some of the development or planning commissions that are looking to advance that more. And the fact you mentioned about union wages. So have you identified those jurisdictions that have project labor agreements already in hand or are looking to get those in place?
Yes, so there is one in Contra Costa County that we use as a template. And then for our other jurisdictions, we say, the project labor agreement of similar scope as the Contra Costa PLA.
Thank you for that clarification. And the fact you, going to a different subject now for the about the solar saturation and the RA value going way down. I think we jokingly said, what about hydro? Has that been part of it? Because it wasn't part of any of the options that you had mentioned up there. So I know we talk about mostly droughts for the past few years, and this may be a one-off year, but the fact that this may be a substantial year, could we have taken advantage of the hydro aspect of renewable energy?
Yes, so hydro is a critical part of our portfolio. So there's sort of two flavors. One is a renewable, which is less than 30 megawatts, and that is both renewable and carbon free. And then a project that's larger than 30 megawatts is only designated as a carbon free resource. So we look for both, and we're actually long in terms of our carbon free position this year, simply because there's going to be so much hydro. We would love to get more small hydro, the kind of renewable and carbon free resource, into our portfolio. We have found that it has been unreliable over kind of in that long-term contracting timeframe, and also a bit hard to come by at this stage. PG&E owns a lot of the kind of hydro throughout the state of California. But as some of those contracts are coming offline and PG&E is not renewing, we're absolutely taking a look at some of those resources, and I had actually contracted for one Kern hydro that was a former PG&E resource that is now under our portfolio.
So I take it those graphics will be added to the portfolio now, including specifying hydro as part of the resource plan there.
Yeah, in terms of the preferred portfolio.
Yes.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, sorry.
Oh, no,
Go
no,
ahead,
some, I think Director Wilkinson was,
go ahead.
put her hand
Sorry.
up.
Yeah, I just had a couple of quick questions. Can you clarify the timeline for introducing 24/7 accounting for both RA and the general energy portfolio?
So there is no requirement currently for 24/7 energy accounting, GHG accounting for energy, but for RA, the timeline is 2025 for implementation.
And then I had a question, which is just to clarify my understanding with the existing annual accounting. If MCE has periods of the day where they have overgeneration of solar, at the same time as the general grid has overgeneration, and that energy is therefore just dumped or discharged, does that still count in terms of our annual accounting for green energy?
So if the system overall is having overgeneration, then most likely our solar will be curtailed, especially if there are local area constraints as well. So automatically, the solar would just not produce. But at times when the solar does produce, I believe it is part of our accounting on an annual basis.
Yeah, so anytime that solar produces, it creates a renewable energy credit. And we get to count all of those renewable energy credits toward our renewable position over the course of the year.
Okay, that makes
But
sense.
when it's curtailed, we do not get any of the renewable credits for that generation, and we have to backfill with other renewable resources. So it is a double whammy. When it's curtailed, we typically have to pay for it, but we can't count it. So we have to buy more.
Okay, that's really helpful. And then the other question I had, at our executive committee meeting, there'd been a gentleman who'd suggested a paper which Dawn had very kindly shared with me from Peninsula Clean Energy on 24/7 accounting of GHG. A great paper. I think everybody should read it. It's really helpful just for educational purposes. But I had a question, which is, it's a tool, a modeling tool, which they seem to be offering to all of the different DCAs. And I was wondering whether Marine Clean Energy was using that as they sort of model out what their profile is going to look like over coming years, or whether they had their own sophisticated modeling.
So, yeah. So we are looking at a 24/7 product, and we have certainly looked at PC's model and we'll use that as a reference. I think the resources that we have under contract right now we wouldn't be able to sort of offer it for our entire portfolio as PC is attempting to do. But as we sort of build out our portfolio with more 24/7 renewable resources, we'll be able to offer a 24/7 carbon-free product to more and more customers over time.
Okay, thank you so much.
And
Thanks.
Lindsay, do you want to say anything about some of the concerns that we have about implementing that approach? I think there were some deficiencies in the planning. It's okay to talk.
Okay. Yeah. So, I've looked at that paper closely, and I think it's really ambitious of PCE, and so I give them credit for that. I think part of their plan is sort of really includes a lot of over procurement due to kind of winter timeframes and, needing, as Video is saying, if we were to build out a portfolio in solar and wind, we'd have to overbuild by 3 to 5%. And so during the times of the 5%, yeah, sorry. And so during the times of the year where all of that energy is over generating, what they're banking on is being able to resell that energy to other CCAs. Right now, those, renewable energy credits are valuable as we've mentioned, there's a bit of a shortfall in the near term. But as all of the procurement mandates and all the projects associated with that do come online in the coming few years, there's the market will be much more saturated with renewable energy. So one of my concerns is, having the ability to resell that energy over the long term, which is really critical for them meeting their sort of 2% premium for that product. So it's, they may be able to resell that over time, but I think there is a risk associated with kind of that over procurement type of strategy.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm not an expert in this at all, but I read through it and saw lots of holes in that approach. But I was just curious whether the modeling that they were sharing was useful in how you're planning.
And if I may just add, like this approach of over procurement is just not scalable. So banking on, being able to sell that energy, if everybody were to do that and over procure, like who's going to buy that? So it's definitely not scalable. And that question has been asked to them and they have acknowledged that it's a flaw. And, maybe certain LSCs who have complementing load shapes can pursue this, but for the most part, like the entire California is not going to solve this problem by doing the same thing.
Thank you so much.
This is Vicky, and I'm sorry, just one additional comment to Director Wilkinson's questions. When Lindsay, Vidi, and we worked on this offering and the so-called tool, our guidance is to create a real physical model that people can see and count, and it's not a accounting product on paper. So we're going through the really tough route to get to what we are looking at, but I think you're looking at something you can be proud of at the end of the day. It's not paper shuffling. It's going to be the real thing that we want to be proud of in delivering our vision and mission. So I'll leave you with that.
Director Birdseye.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the thoughtful presentation and all the great answers that we're getting out of the team here. You mentioned out-of-state resources and procurement. Does MCE have a position on the Western Grid Integration Bill that's being proposed this session?
Yeah, we are not taking a formal position at this time, but we do believe that there is a tremendous need for increased trading and collaboration across states. We think that there's a lot of benefits. The main, most important one is affordability. We think will be driven by more interstate trading, buying and selling across states. There are, one example is, we have, when it's the peak hours in California, we have a different peak than other states. We have different resources. There's just more opportunities for resource diversity, different load shapes. So there are many reasons why increasing trade among the states will really create some benefits around affordability. So we're hopeful that there will be some legislative solutions. I know that there's a Holden bill currently on the table. We're interested to see how that evolves. We think many elements of it are very workable. There may be some elements that could be improved, but we may be coming back to your board in a month or so to talk more about that specific issue.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions for staff?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
this is Kevin Haroff here in San Rafael. I just want to thank staff for a very thoughtful presentation on this subject. Some of us have heard most of this presentation previously, but not all of it. And tonight's discussion added some details that I think were that are helpful. But a lot of this was presented to the executive committee the last time we met. And I think it's fair to say that group, at least as far as the specific ask staff is making in tonight's presentation, to give direction to explore new GHG-free service offerings to customers, that was discussed in that committee. And I think it's fair to say that it was endorsed.
Thank you. Turning it over to our Madam Clerk to see if we have any public comment.
No raised hands, Chair.
Thank you. I will, if there's no further questions from our members on the board, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move the resource mix and new service offering program as described.
I'll second.
We can't hear.
Moved by Director Perkins and seconded by Director Nguyen. Matt. Pleasant Hill.
Could I ask, I'm sorry, this is Kevin again, just because we had a little difficulty with the audio, can we have the motion restated for our benefit here?
All right. I move we adopt the deep green resource mix and new service offering program as described.
And I wonder if I could.
Yeah.
We might have too many buttons.
Still trouble with the audio.
Thank you.
Dawn, can you
Yeah, sorry.
clar-
We're learning a few things about our mics here. But I wanted to ask or point out that what the staff was suggesting is that we may want to spend some time developing a proposal for a new GHG-free service offering. So the recommendation would be that the board direct staff to explore new GHG-free service offerings for customers. We haven't quite developed that yet. So if that is what you intended to recommend, I just wanted to clarify.
I think that was the understanding we had here.
So moved.
Still second.
Madam Clerk, please call roll.
Are you sure?
I'm sure.
Belvedere,
Yes.
Benicia,
Yes.
Corte Madera,
Yes.
Danville,
Yes.
Fairfax,
Yes.
Fairfield, Larkspur,
Yes.
County of Marin,
Yes.
City of Martinez offered her yes vote prior to her leaving. Martinez, yes. Moraga,
Aye.
excuse me. County of Napa and all four Napa cities.
Yes.
Oakley,
Yes.
Pinole,
Yes.
Pittsburgh,
Yes.
Pleasant Hill,
Yes.
Richmond,
Yes.
San Anselmo,
Yes.
San Pablo,
Yes.
San Ramon,
Yes.
Solano County,
Yes.
Tiburon, Vallejo,
Aye.
Walnut Creek.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Moving on to item 9, board matters and staff matters. Would any members of the board like to share any board matters? How about in San Rafael? It's just hard for me to see your light on the screen here, so I just want to make sure I'm not missing anyone. All right, seeing none. Are there any staff matters to discuss at this time? All right, seeing none, moving on to item 10. We will adjourn the meeting at 9:47 PM. Thank you, and everyone have a good evening.